Welcome to everyone who joins this self-knowledge course conference. Today we will be looking at topic number 32 of this course, entitled, Radical Change. The objective of this conference is for us to learn how to achieve a radical change in ourselves. This change will be gradual, but permanent, because it will be a root change. Many times, we want to change our lives by making external changes. However, we see that we cannot achieve it, and that we really don't know how to change. Today we are going to see how we are going to make this change, and what is the tool that is going to help us achieve it. We will begin by analyzing this phrase, so that we begin to understand the reason why we never achieve real changes in ourselves. As long as a man continues with the error of believing himself, one, unique, individual, it is evident that radical change will be more than impossible. Let's analyze this in detail. Since we are so identified with the physical body and with the personality that we have created in this existence, we make the mistake of believing that we are an individual, that we are one, but in reality, we are many people at the same time. Our personality makes us think that we are in a unique and determined way. We describe ourselves by saying, I am a good person, or I am an honest person, or I am a shy person, or I am an extroverted person, etc. And so, we believe that we are one I. We say, I am like this. But it turns out that I am like this, in reality, it is our first obstacle to achieving a real change, since it prevents us from understanding our inner multiplicity. We don't realize that within us we are many individuals, that within us we carry many ways of being, selves, or egos, and that each one has their own particular way of thinking, feeling, and acting. When we are happy, we don't think, feel, and act the same way we do when we are sad, or when we are angry, or when we are afraid. When we feel in love, we do not think, feel, and act in the same way as when we feel hatred or jealousy. We don't think, feel, and act the same when we are with people we want to impress, as when we are with people with whom we feel confident. Then we see that, when we say, I am such and such a way, we are only identifying ourselves with one of our multiple I's. Within us we carry all kinds of psychological defects, or ways of being. We have many good defects and many bad defects. For example, within us we have the alcoholic I, but it may be that for some reason, whether due to personality or convenience, we don't drink alcohol. And then we could believe that we don't have the alcoholic defect, when the reality is that we have it, but it is repressed, and it manifests from its other polarity, which is the abstemious I. But this abstemious I has no true understanding or wisdom about alcoholism, therefore, it is not a virtue. The abstainer usually criticizes and judges, and even feels rejection, repulsion, or hatred towards the alcoholic. And this is because, having not observed or worked on the alcoholic defect within, he only has it repressed inside. Then, there is no true understanding, there is no virtue. He is only in the passive pole of the defect. And this is how we have multitudes of psychological defects within us, that move in that duality called good and evil. And all of them have trapped a portion of our consciousness. Only when we eliminate all those ways of being from within us, our lustful, angry, quarrelsome, gossiping, lazy, greedy, envious, proud, etc. both in its active pole and in its passive pole, and we rescue all the trapped consciousness, then we will be only consciousness. Then we will be one. The inner work begins with the rigorous self-observation, since self-observation is the starting point of self-knowledge. If we don't observe ourselves, we will never be able to discover our inner reality, who we really are. If we never truly observe ourselves, we will not become aware that we need to change deeply and radically. Thus, we see that the initial point of radical change remains hidden, as long as man continues to believe himself one. And the only way to become aware that we are not one, but many, is through severe self-observation, without escapes of any kind. If we observe ourselves, paying attention to what we feel, think, and do during a day of our life, we will realize that in a short period of time we change many times our way of being, feeling, acting, and speaking. Our body is just a vehicle where different defects enter and exit, making use of that human machine. At this moment, we are just puppets of our psychological defects. These fight to take over the machine, creating chaos within us, since each ego looks after its own interest. Anger only seeks to harm, mistreat others, even losing the physical body, if necessary, to satisfy its need for violence. Lust only seeks sexual satisfaction, feeling pleasure, adultery, etc. Greed only seeks to accumulate and waste to satisfy its desires. Sadness only wants to suffer and regret. And so, each of our psychological defects watches over its interest, the satisfaction of its egoic desire. And if we don't become aware of that internal multiplicity, we will not be able to change. Radical change begins when we begin to observe ourselves in each moment. When we are in a state of self-observation, we are attentive to what happens in our energy centers at all times, especially in our 5 lower centers, which are the ones that are fallen and unbalanced: motor, mental, emotional, instinctive, and sexual centers. And this is very important, because if we don't observe the manifestation of our psychological defects, we will not be able to eliminate them, since it would in no way be possible to eliminate unknown errors. Therefore, it is urgent to previously observe what we want to separate from our psyche. If we are observing ourselves in any situation, for example, when we are looking at things on social media and suddenly, we see something of a sexual nature. If at that moment we are attentive to observing ourselves, we can discover how our sexual center has come into activity, as some eyes of sexual excitement have taken over the sexual center. In other circumstances, we might observe some anxiety in our instinctive center, and when we observe carefully, we discover that it is the manifestation of a psychological defect within us that wants to smoke. Or if it is in a situation of adultery, we see that the anxiety has been generated by the eye that wants to be unfaithful to the partner. Or, on the other hand, we can discover that it is an eye of fear, or uncertainty towards something that is going to happen, which is generating that state of anxiety. In our emotional center we can discover all kinds of emotions. For example, if we are with someone we like, we can observe a lot of activity of our sentimental and lustful defects, clumsily spending our energy. On the other hand, in the emotional center we could observe defects of resentment or sadness. At the level of our intellectual center, we could observe how, at a given moment, our mind is assaulted by the defect of worry, making us have all kinds of negative thoughts. We could observe at the level of our motor center how some psychological defects use our motor energy through words to insult others. Other defects use our sight to look at people with lust. These are just a few small examples of what we could discover in ourselves if we practice self-observation. If we truly want to change, we must be willing at all times to discover, observe, and eliminate all those psychological defects that exist within us. For example, we are faced with the situation that we have to stand in a long line to be served at the bank. If at that moment we are observing ourselves, we can discover many psychological defects that begin to manifest in us. This way we could discover our laziness, impatience, intolerance, etc. In this situation, emotionally we immediately feel disgust, an emotion of displeasure at having to wait. In the mental part, we observe how the defects of complaint and criticism immediately begin to manifest. In our instinctive center, we can observe how anxiety and impatience enter. In our motor center, we can observe those defects of laziness that seek to make us lean on something, or that we are changing feet, or that we begin to expend motor energy with some nervous tick of impatience, such as biting our nails, or shaking our feet in a compulsive way. Even on a sexual level, we could discover a tension, since those nervous tics that lead us to make compulsive and repetitive movements are part of our defect of masturbation, which with this repetitive stimulus generates pleasure to calm us down. We can observe and eliminate all of this in a moment, in a simple and everyday situation like this. Likewise, many psychological defects manifest in us in the face of the different events that occur in our daily lives. Thus, we also discover that our eyes are not one, but are composed of multiple details. We have to know that the inner and radical change is not going to happen in a magical way, but rather we have to observe in ourselves the expression of each detail of the defect and eliminate them with the help of our particular Divine Mother. Many times, we seek to make external changes believing that these will generate changes within us. We believe that by changing partner, job, country, or religion, we will change internally. However, wherever we go we will carry with us all those psychological defects that are the ones who create our reality, and that are what cause that we end up attracting the same circumstances, the same type of people, and that we end up making the same mistakes over and over again. Other times we tend to seek inner change through self-help books, spirituality books, or through moral or ethical codes. We seek to change internally by following spiritual masters, taking courses, attending religious services, or even at these conferences. But we don't realize that none of this is going to change us, since this type of work is not external but internal. And those who think that any manual of civility, or external and superficial ethical system, can lead them to success, will in fact be totally wrong. We want someone to tell us what to do, so we can try to do it, and then feel that we are good, and with that save ourselves the trouble of having to face our own inner perversity. What we do with this is dedicate ourselves to repressing our defects to fit into a system of morality. But, since all those defects are still alive inside us, we end up falling back into the same mistakes. The fact that intimate work begins with attention focused on full self-observation is more than enough reason to demonstrate that this requires a very particular personal effort from each of us. No other person could do this job for us. No one can save us from ourselves. No one can eliminate our psychological defects except us. Only when we decide to apply, putting self-observation and psychological death into practice, do we manage to verify real and radical changes within ourselves, which will lead to a transformation of our lives. Another thing we must keep in mind is that, just by accepting the idea that we are many, because this concept resonates with us, because we think it is true that we have many different ways of being, or because it sounds logical to us. But without understanding the need to begin to directly observe this internal multiplicity of errors, and without encouraging ourselves to study all our psychological defects to understand and eliminate them, we are not going to achieve any real change. We will simply be fooling ourselves. No change is possible in our psyche without direct observation of that entire set of subjective factors that we carry within us. Only through the rigorous effort of judicious self-observation, without escapes of any kind, can we truly verify that we are not one but many. When we begin to observe ourselves in each moment, with the true intention to change and eliminate every expression of the ego that we discover in each of our centers, we can truly begin to create radical changes in ourselves. The important thing is that we understand that admitting the plurality of the ego, and evidencing it through rigorous observation, are two very different things. And what is truly important is that we decide to seriously begin to observe ourselves, so that we can verify for ourselves what we are explaining here. If we don't work on ourselves, we will lose this opportunity to achieve a radical transformation that our real being is giving us, by motivating us to receive these teachings. If, on the other hand, we accept that we have many defects, but we postpone the change until we have a better disposition, a better economic or sentimental situation, etc., we will never achieve a radical change. Avoiding the work of intimate observation, seeking evasion, is an unmistakable sign of degeneration. Because as long as a person maintains the illusion that he is always one and the same person, he cannot change, and it is obvious that the purpose of this work is precisely to achieve a gradual change in our inner life. If what we do with this information is to start using the ego as an excuse for our bad actions, for example, we start to excuse ourselves by saying, "Yes, I do this, but that is because I have that very strong defect." Or we say, "Yes, I have to meditate on this defect." But we never do it. This is a sign of being very attached to the defect and not wanting to change. We only deceive ourselves if we believe that we are changing simply by recognizing our defects. If we want to change, we have to start here and now. We must begin to observe ourselves from this very moment and decide that every detail of that defect that we discover expressing through our centers, we are going to observe it, we are going to judge it, and we are going to eliminate it. We must stop being complacent with our psychological defects, stop being permissive with them, and stop letting our defects to take control of our body. If what we are talking about today remains only a theory, it is useless. This will only help us if we apply it, and if we verify it for ourselves. Evidencing, experiencing, and comprehending is the fundamental thing. Only in this way is it possible to work consciously to achieve radical change. We will really come to evidence this reality when through self-observation we manage to discover that we have this or that psychological defects. For example, through self-observation we are able to perceive that we have a lust defect, which doesn't allow us to stop wasting our sexual energy. And we will begin to experience the changes when we dedicate ourselves to observing each of the details that make up that defect and eliminating them. In the case of the defect of lust, we eliminate the instinctive sensations that precipitate us to the loss of energy. We eliminate the emotions of pleasure and the emotions of displeasure that lead us to lose energy. We eliminate sentimentality, mental concepts, the mechanical imagination with which our mind projects lustful images. We eliminate lustful desires and the vice of expelling sexual energy through masturbation or sexual practice as a couple. We eliminate anxiety, mechanical actions, etc. And as we observe and eliminate all this multiplicity of details that make up our defect of lust, asking our Divine Mother for the elimination of each of them, we experience liberation, and comprehension comes. In this case, the comprehension of the value of our sexual energy and the power that chastity is. As we make ourselves aware of our inner multiplicity, and we start experiencing the change that occurs in us through the understanding and elimination of each of our negative ways of being, our consciousness awakens, and we will begin to know ourselves. That experience is that taste of work that we talked about in the meditation conference. Every day, every circumstance, is an opportunity to work on ourselves, to improve ourselves. How do we realize that we already understand one of our psychological defects? When it no longer affects us. When we no longer react as we used to. When it no longer bothers us, and we no longer suffer because of it. There we will not be longer be slaves to that defect. And more importantly, we know that we already understand the defect when we come to see others under the influence of that defect and we don't criticize them anymore, we don't judge them, because we have already rescued the wisdom, the light, the conscience that the defect had trapped. And so, little by little and as we advance in this work, we will achieve a truly radical change in ourselves. Thus, we see that affirming is one thing and understanding is another. Anyone can talk extensively about psychological death, about liberation and enlightenment, without ever having experienced, through self-observation and psychological death, a true transformation within himself. Then that would just be insubstantial, vain, and ambiguous talk. It is not useful for us to stay only with the knowledge we are receiving in this conference, and affirm that it is real, but we must come to comprehend it. To know and to comprehend are different. Knowing comes from the mind, while comprehending comes from the heart. The death of our defects is not something that we must only know with the mind, but something that we must come to understand with the heart. Knowing is based on theories and concepts. For example, we know the method for psychological death, or for spiritual birth, or for meditation, or for astral projection. We research it, we read books about it, we talk about these topics. But all that information is useless if it only remains in the mind. Comprehending is different, it is obtained with practice, with direct verification of what is experienced. When we have already put it into practice and we manage to see its result, we manage to obtain wisdom, then a comprehension comes to our hearts. All change must be made through a process of comprehension. If we make changes in our way of acting, in our habits and customs, but without comprehending, without working and eliminating the psychological defects that are attached to those ways of being, we will end up returning to those old habits. Therefore, if we want to make radical changes, we must always make them based on the comprehension of why we must change, and the direct observation and elimination of the details that make up that negative way of being. Otherwise, we will end up in frustration. Now, there are certain defects that we must prioritize, and which we must seek to comprehend from the beginning of the work, to be radical with them. Since these defects prevent progress in the elimination of the other defects, as they directly damage our sexual creative energy. Therefore, these defects reverse the creative power of our sexual energy, leading us to expel it, and with this, leading us to relive the psychological defects that we have eliminated, and to create more and more defects. By falling into these three defects, the work done in psychological death is lost, and it becomes impossible for us to achieve chastity. These are fornication, alcohol consumption, and drug use. Fornication is the loss of sexual energy through ejaculation and orgasm, in sexual practice with a partner, or through masturbation, or through nocturnal emissions. By pouring out our sexual energy, defects are revived, and more are created, since fornication is the way through which we have created all the defects we carry within us. Therefore, from the beginning it is necessary to be radical with everything that leads us to fornication, pornography, masturbation, adultery, etc. Furthermore, you have to be radical with drugs and alcohol. Substances such as cocaine, heroin, crack, etc., as well as mystical drugs as ayahuasca, peyote, hallucinogenic mushrooms, marijuana, etc., as well as alcohol, revive dead defects. Because they fundamentally alter sexual energy, just as we studied in Lecture 14. If we really want to do this work of awakening our consciousness, we must be radical from the beginning with these three defects. When a person begins to carefully observe himself, from the angle that he is not one, but many, he has obviously begun serious work on his inner nature. To achieve real changes within ourselves, we must learn to be radical. For the new to be born, the old must die. And this has been today's conference. I hope it is very useful for your inner work. Thank you very much to everyone who is participating in these conferences. I wish you much strength in your inner work and much success in your awakening. I invite you to the next conference, in which we will talk about two very interesting and important laws, the law of octaves and the law of entropy. We will see how these two laws of force work, how to use the law of musical octaves to ascend in inner work, and how to combat entropy to prevent descent on the path to self-realization. Thank you all very much. Do not hesitate to send us any questions you may have. Until next time.